The John Sevier Center, a landmark in downtown Johnson City, Tennessee. Every day, thousands pass by this once glamorous hotel that since the 1970s has been subsidized housing, mostly for seniors and people with disabilities. But this building has a story many may have never heard. A story of terror.
I seen one guy come to a window and say, "Help me."
And tragedy.
16 fatalities. You don't ever want to see anything like that. I mean, ever.
Of selfless heroism.
But I guess that was just out of the heat of the fire.
We knew that it could be a lot of lives lost.
A story of a city coming together.
If they were in need before, they were really in need now.
Of lives saved.
Heroic effort on everybody in the Tri-Cities area.
And lives lost.
It was horrible to see those people hanging out of the windows and, just terrible, hollering, "Help me, help me."
All playing out on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1989, 30 years ago. Even if there had never been a deadly fire in downtown Johnson City, Christmas Eve 1989 would have been memorable for something else. The weather, frigid cold, a stabbing wind, treacherous ice. As the sun sets over Johnson City, people are gathering inside their homes and in churches to celebrate with friends and family the sacred night before Christmas, a celebration that for some would never happen. 5 p.m. The Christmas Eve 1989 weather forecast has everyone on alert. Fire Chief Doug Buckles instructs his crew to put chains on fire engine tires.
Well, it was very gloomy, and it had spitted snow that day, and they was calling for ice and and everything. Everybody was kind of keeping up the news, and it'd be Christmas.
Some firefighters are at the Johnson City Country Club after a fire alarm call earlier in the afternoon. Back downtown at the 11-story John Sevier Center, some of the almost 150 elderly and disabled people who live there are out and about, celebrating Christmas Eve with family. But Josephine Eager is home, staying warm in apartment 503. She turned down an invitation to be with family so she could attend Christmas Eve church services at Muncie Memorial United Methodist, just across the street.
Mother didn't want to go because she wanted to be at Muncie that night. So my wife and I, Pam and I, had a early Christmas in her apartment in John Sevier, and then we left for Cincinnati, and Mother stayed.
Over at Muncie Church, music minister Doug Grove DeJarnett has everything ready for the church's most popular service of the year.
In the music ministry world and in the church, and our 5 o'clock service is one of our biggest services. I mean, it's packed with the families and children.
Also opting to stay home in her John Sevier apartment on this frigid Christmas Eve is Juanita Ward. She also turned down an invitation to go out with family, including her granddaughter, Teresa Greer.
I had asked her to come and eat with us Christmas Eve night, and she said, "No, I'll just wait till tomorrow and come." And we had a little tree in her room.
A tree adorned with ornaments, including this one, collected through the years, now proudly displayed in an apartment she loved, in a building that offered her community and security after years of hard work in a factory.
It was a good place. She was very happy. She made friends.
Up on the 7th floor, Ivan Atwood is at home too. The 68-year-old from Johnson County was a navigator in World War II. On that night, he's keeping track of the time with this General Electric clock on the wall of his apartment. But then, the sound of a fire alarm at the John Sevier Center on South Rome Street.
I think when the alarm came in, it wasn't single digits yet. It was about 12 to 15 degrees, just a few minutes after 5.
Rookie firefighter Danny Jones is on duty at fire station number 4, listening to radio traffic from the crew answering that alarm call at the country club.
So with them being gone, truck 3, the truck I was riding, sort of put us first in line to be on the scene. So we responded down Main Street. As we got about where the Johnson City Press is, the driver, Jerry Leonard, looked over and he made sure I was getting geared up. And he said, called my name, he said, Jonesy, so we got a fire.
A point worth making at that moment, Jones says, because fire alarms at the John Sevier Center were not uncommon. Most of them nothing serious, but just a few months prior, fire in one of the units killed one person, a 76-year-old man who lived on the 5th floor of the low-income high-rise that once had been the glamorous centerpiece of Johnson City. 1924, the John Sevier Hotel opens as the tallest building in Johnson City and the most elegant. Local businesses raise the money to build it, and the day it opens, it is the place to host swanky social events and famous guests like First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt.
It was just the heart of our downtown. I mean, if you look at it, it's on Roane and Market Street. There's not much closer to being the center of Johnson City as that.
But by the mid-1970s, the glamour is gone. Businesses are moving out of downtown. The John Sevier stops being a hotel, and by the late 70s, it reopens as the John Sevier Center. Subsidized housing, specifically for seniors and people with physical challenges. At that time, the fire codes only require a standpipe system, a single pipe providing a water source on each floor in case of a fire. Code in the late 70s did not require a sprinkler system. That October fire reveals another concern: heavy smoke escaping through gaps around the standpipes and through the elevator shafts, collecting in the upper floors. A foreshadow of what's to come. Just 2 months later on Christmas Eve, 1989.
We had our pumpers and our ladders all in this area down there. Most of the men had congregated over on this side.
The initial attack was what I would consider normal. Get the water line, get secure, get a line in, crawl in, try to find the fire. That's what we did and it seemed normal.
Danny Jones remembers thick smoke already filling the building and intense heat.
In the fire, you can feel the heat sort of stretch your skin, and you can feel it burning, the sensation. I knew that because I got very hot on the initial attack.
What he and his team could not have known was what was about to happen in the minutes and hours to come. The fire, which is filling the highest floors with billowing smoke, actually ignited in room 102, a ground-level apartment along South Roane Street. From there, the fire spreads through a drop ceiling filled with combustible materials, growing in intensity as it moves across the first floor into the lobby. Only then does the fire and smoke trigger smoke alarms in the hallway. Investigators say while nothing above the second floor ever caught fire, smoke escapes through the gaps in the standpipe system and through those elevator shafts, filling the 11-story building with toxic gas and blinding smoke.
It was escaping and going everywhere. The smoke was. It was going vertical everywhere.
I don't think I didn't understand at that time the magnitude of what was going on. I was new, I'd worked hard, but I still wasn't ready for that.
We knew that it could be a lot of lives lost and everything because there's 150 apartments in the John Sevier. But lo and behold, because it was on Christmas Eve, a lot of the people that lived there went with their families and left, but there was no place there's no sign-out place. We didn't know whether it was there, and we had to just assume there was 150 people in their apartments in that building when we arrived on the scene.
Just a few blocks away at the WJHL television studio, Kenny Hawkins is preparing for the Christmas Eve sports report when he hears about fire trucks racing downtown.
When I came out the door, I looked at the John Sevier building and I could see smoke and fire.
WJHL video from December 24th, 1989 shows fire trucks surrounding the building and smoke billowing from every window.
I started shooting the scene. it was really almost overwhelming, to be completely honest, because there was so much going on and you didn't know what to do. You almost didn't know what to shoot. You know, I'd done it for so long that it actually took me out of my element for a second, because it was just so hectic. You had people running around wanting to help, but you couldn't get into the building because of the smoke and the fire.
By then, firefighter Paul Holder is on the scene.
Then I seen smoke coming through the top of the John Sevier, and I knew the smoke had run all the way through.
Holder is 51 years old that night. He's assigned to the fire department's snorkel truck.
That meant that you had to get it in gear fast if you're going to do anything at all. It's got to be done fast. You might say fast and furious.
911 dispatchers are calling for backup from every department around.
And I remember getting in touch back to the station, and I said, call everybody. I don't care. Call every shooter we have. Videographer, call them in. I said, because this is bad. I'm telling you, this is going to be bad.
More WJHL TV staff mobilized to cover the story.
Rumors continue to run rampant as to how many people have been killed in this fire,
including reporter and news anchor Stephanie Boyd.
As I was driving to the station and I got on what's now 26, I saw the smoke and I thought, this is going to be bad. And it was, of course.
WJHL then begins to broadcast an appeal for all police and firefighters in the city to come downtown.
Basically, they saw the news report on JHL and they started coming on their own.
City Manager John Campbell is at home with his wife and 2 young children, preparing to celebrate Christmas Eve. His wife, Gail Campbell, the interim director of the Johnson City Public Library, is the first to get the call.
There was a fire at the John Sevier Center and that they wondered if I could open the library. And I guess they just thought they could use it. It was 10 degrees outside. It was really cold, and I think they were thinking it was a warm building they could go into. So I picked up my little camera and my 2 kids, who were 7 and 10, and John, meanwhile, got the call from the fire chief.
Gail Campbell didn't know it then, but her family home video camera, in the ready to capture Christmas Eve memories, would soon be recording a rare historical document of what was about to become Johnson City's most deadly disaster.
I remember coming in from North Johnson City, as soon as it passed the Unaco-Watauga exit, seeing the smoke, you could tell how bad it was. Of course, you immediately start thinking, oh, you know who's living there, the age of the people, you know, who's on the scene, that kind of thing.
It was just all the fire trucks, rescue squads, police cars, blinking lights. You know, it was 5:30, so it was already dusk, and just from one end of Run Street to the other, just solid emergency vehicles.
Gail Campbell unlocks the Johnson City Public Library, quickly ushers her 2 children to a quiet area where they're safe, and then begins meeting immediate needs. Then, when there's a break, she starts to record video of the remarkable scene happening right outside the library's front door.
We didn't have any idea when we went driving down there what it was going to be.
This home video of the fire scene has never been viewed by the public until now. The public library quickly becomes Operation Headquarters, where the fire chief and other emergency and government officials begin to coordinate the rescue effort.
It was on the news. Most all the firemen took it on their own and come in on their own, just come in. And we had people from volunteer fire departments all over at Washington County and Carter County. They was getting the news too.
One of those volunteer firefighters is Greg Largent from Hampton, Tennessee.
Several of us carpooled together, and then we had an additional scanner with us, and it told us what the situation was, and I was nowhere prepared to see what I saw.
Across the street at Muncie Memorial United Methodist Church, the senior minister can see what is happening too, and makes the call to cancel church services.
When you've got, you know, a tragedy and a disaster happening right across the street, it would have been almost unthinkable for us to say, well, we'll see what we can do after we finish church. From the moment we walked through the door, everybody was already being assigned, you know, responsibilities, and our senior pastor had already made the decision. He said, open every door in the building and let's get ready to do what we need to do. And so we never, you know, I mean, there was never a question. We have to serve in a different way.
Out on the streets, firefighters begin to meet ominous challenges. Water used to fight the fire is freezing on every surface. First attempts at radio communications are nearly impossible.
The first people went in there had a radio, but all this is going on in the commotion, them radios would not work from inside out there. They overshot. They was trying to use them.
So you had trouble communicating?
Yeah, real close. Yes, we did.
Air tanks, critically needed by firefighters to search in the toxic smoke, start to freeze. And then the most alarming challenge, reaching the people throughout the building who begin to appear in windows and are begging for help. Among them, 78-year-old Texie Hamrick and her son Alex. They and Texie's daughter Lynn Abbott Jennings are visiting on Christmas Eve when smoke begins to fill the building. Lynn recalled what happened in this 2010 interview.
That was the most horrible memory that I actually have, was while we were standing in that window, we heard a lot of screaming and people crying for help. And we just prayed.
At that moment, Paul Holder appears.
Someone yelled around the corner, and said, "There's a lady in the window." And I said, "All right," so I knew what I had to do right then. Position my truck to attempt to rescue as many as I could. Happened to be one there. But the ladder into the bucket, up to the lady that's in the window, and you go up and you get her. There's another guy up there, I don't know how he got out, but he did. But she wasn't going to make it long, and so I went up and got her on the 16-foot ladder.
That woman was Lynn Abbott Jennings.
Brought her down, and she kind of got a death grip on me, and I reasoned with her. I said, "Lady, put your hand right here, and your other hand right here. We're going down to the ground. You're safe. You're safe."
You're just standing there watching it all unfold.
Safely on the ground, Jennings faces a new terror, whether her mother and brother will be able to make it out alive. While she waits, she's comforted by strangers, including WJHL's Stephanie Boyd.
We were all participants in it. Typically in the news business, you try to be an observer, but that night we were all participants, and we had to be.
A truck with a longer ladder comes and rescues the remaining 2 family members. Paul Holder says he thinks often of that moment during the night.
My job was rescue the lady in the window, which I was successful by the help of God. I knew that I had done a good job, the best I could, to rescue somebody.
As John Sevier residents leave the building, some carried, some escaping on their own.
First initial thing was we've got to open up the doors because people have to come someplace where it's warm, and so we just need to get them in the building.
Members at Muncie Church turned Sunday schools into triage rooms for fire victims.
They were bringing people out of the windows. They had ladders going up, and then the big hook and ladder truck, and they were bringing people down and immediately bringing them across, because this was, of course, it was freezing cold. It was only 1 degree. There was water everywhere. The smoke was going up, and so this was the direct entrance in.
And church members create a makeshift warming shelter for first responders.
And then as the firefighters were arriving and going, you have water and frozen firefighters everywhere. And so the second concern then was that they have to be able to have a place to come in briefly.
Muncie became a big center. They were supposed to have a service, but they canceled that, and their people volunteered greatly to help, set up the Red Cross set up there. They set up hospitality for the workers.
To see some of those firemen who just look so young and they look so tired and so exhausted sitting in the library, just exhausted, taking their boots off so they could just sit there for a minute. And you knew they'd been in there. I mean, it's, and you knew they saw bad things.
Medical helicopters begin carrying the injured to local hospitals. But while lives are being saved, people are still trapped throughout the building.
It was horrible to see those people hanging out of the windows. And, just terrible, hollering, help me, and ladders that wouldn't reach up to them. It was just a terrible sight to behold and not be able to help them.
Teresa Greer and her family hear about the fire and rush downtown to check on her grandmother, Juanita Ward.
I saw an elderly woman hanging out the window, and she just kept saying, "Help me, help me."
Walking on streets covered in ice, she goes to places where fire victims are going for shelter, with no luck.
I went over to a fire truck, and I said, "My grandmother's, I think she's in that room, her light's on." He said, "We've got everybody out." I said, "No, I think she's in there." I said, "Can you bust the window?" And he said, "No, we can't."
We could hear a lady cry for help, and we looked up, and sure enough, she was hanging halfway out the window.
Also outside the building, Hampton volunteer firefighter Greg Largent, assigned to rescue trapped people by positioning ladders outside to reach those on the 4th and 5th floors.
I actually helped secure the ladder, and it was my older brother that secured and got the first lady out. Then I was able to switch positions with him, and we were fortunate enough to get a second lady out of the window.
But the volunteers from Hampton working on the mezzanine level don't have ladders long enough to reach everyone needing help.
The one gentleman that was there with his grandmother, sadly, when we were on the mezzanine trying to reach them, they were above our ladders. We just couldn't get to them.
Soon, Largent and other volunteers are reassigned to go in with oxygen tanks and help anyone they could find.
Just after the call went out, emergency crews from throughout Northeast Tennessee responded, including crews.
I was scared. I had never been into a building that was that black.
For the first time in 30 years, Greg Largent is watching the video taken outside the building while he and others searched for people inside.
The ventilation wasn't working, so they literally had a crane, and we're shattering windows and just trying to vent the building any way we could to be able to see. I had the mag light, which was, at the time wasn't an LED, but it was about as bright as light as we had. And I had it turned on and turned toward my face, and it looked like I was holding a cigarette lighter. That's how dark and black it was. In today's fire prevention, you pre-plan a building. So you kind of know where the stairwells are. You know what potential hazards lay before you. I had no clue. And literally, when I first stepped out, I was breathing too rapid, and I had to calm myself down and go, "You've done this before. It's just a different place." That's the hardest part, was just not knowing what you were going to literally crawl into.
Near zero temperatures cause his air tank to freeze, so Greg Largent leaves the building to get a new one. And that's when WJHL reporter Stephanie Boyd finds him and conducts a brief interview.
It's real black and real smoky. A flashlight really doesn't do you that much good. You got about 2.5 foot visibility inside.
Largent has never seen this interview until now.
They asked me what it was like in there. I'm not very proud of what the words I used then as I do today, but I know they were just asking questions, and I was in a hurry to get back to doing my job.
By then, the job is turned from rescue to recovery. Back in the building, still remembering the man and his grandmother they couldn't reach, Largent and others start crawling on the ground. On the 10th floor, they find what everyone had been fearing, a discovery that would happen over and over again in the hours to come. Some of the fire victims were found in their apartments, hiding under mattresses, in closets. Other victims were found in hallways here at the John Sevier, where they breathed their last breaths, just trying to escape. First responders who found them just a few hours earlier had been thinking about wrapping up their shifts and going home to spend Christmas with family. But now they find themselves in the midst of a catastrophe that soon would make national news headlines. Volunteer firefighter Greg Largent, now crawling through the smoke-filled hallways, makes his way to the general area where the people he and his crew were unable to reach.
The one gentleman that was there with his grandmother, sadly, when we were on the mezzanine trying to reach them, they were above our ladders. We just couldn't get to them. And sadly, several hours later, I was able to locate him.
2 days after the fire, the Johnson City Press reported that 29-year-old Brian Kozad was among the 16 victims, as was his grandmother, 79-year-old Carmen Bond, for whom Kozad had been caring around the clock. She had cancer and emphysema. She was bedfast and dependent on oxygen and her grandson.
We located his grandmother with a towel, a moist towel over her face. She was near the bed, and he, unfortunately, we found him under the window where he was crying out for help.
The newspaper article recounts the heartbreaking story of Kozad calling relatives, telling about a fire alarm, his inability to get his grandmother out. Another call in which Kozad describes smoke filling the floors, and then no answer.
That has always stayed with me. Able to not completely forget about it, but put it out of your mind almost to a degree. But when you have someone crying for help and there's nothing you can do, you're doing the best you can, that never leaves you.
I seen one guy come to a window and say, help me. Tell him we could get a ladder to him. You know, we didn't see his light no more, so I don't know if I got him out or not.
It's real black and real smoky. The flashlight really doesn't do you that much good. You got about 2.5 foot visibility inside. Red Cross and Salvation Army officials also were on the scene, providing food for workers and also...
Thoughts that came in your mind when you saw that?
How bad it really was. Yeah, Christmas. 16 deaths.
Back outside of Juanita Ward's ground floor apartment, her beloved home where she chose to stay that Christmas Eve, Teresa Greer remembers a relative rushing to break in and save her grandmother.
They did bust open the window, and I was right there with them. And I could see my grandmother laying in the floor in her house coat. She didn't have her glasses on, and the position she was facing was towards the window. So my guess is she got up and smoke took her over. She would have had to walk 6 steps to get out the window, but she only made it about 3.
Emergency crews rushed Juanita Ward to the hospital, where the family members gathered and hoped for the best.
I don't know how long we were there, but they finally come out and told us that she did not make it.
Neither did Ivan Atwood, who days later would be buried with full military honors at the Mountain Home National Cemetery. Also lost in that fire, Josephine Eager, who'd stayed home as well, so she could attend church at Muncie Methodist Christmas Eve.
I guess maybe 3:30 in the morning or 4 in the morning, we got a call up in Cincinnati from the associate pastor saying that there had been a fire in John Sevier, and that Mother was one of the people that didn't make it out. It's not the kind of phone call you ever want to get, but it's the way it was.
They were bringing out people who were dead, and so that the library kind of became the morgue. That's where they were, and then there were people who were calling in to find out if their loved one was here.
Interim Public Library Director Gail Campbell captured this remarkable video inside the library.
And Reverend Jeffries came, the police chaplain, and he said we should, because we were putting them just in the middle room, and then he said we need to put them over here in the meeting room, and he was dealing with families and people that were coming. We had 3 bodies under the Christmas tree in the meeting room, in the main room. And he said, we need something to mark the bodies. So I gave him the catalog cards and the fishing wire, and they went off with it. It was really, really sad.
That was the moment that you all of a sudden realized there were going to be a lot of people who were going to be calling and coming here that night, that the news wasn't going to be good for them. It is a tragedy anyway with the fire and what was going on, but there were some people who were going to come out of it, you know, having lived through it, but there were a lot of them that weren't, and for those families it was going to be really, really awful.
Soon the decision is made to move the makeshift morgue to the city's parking garage nearby. By the end of the night, 16 lives were lost, about 10% of the John Sevier Center residents. Along with Atwood, Eager, and Ward, 13 others perished in the John Sevier fire. 2 of the victims were visiting their grandparents. 10 of the dead were 76 or older. The oldest was 89.
A major fire is underway at this hour at the John Sevier Center.
The local retirement home houses around 150 residents.
By 11 p.m., WJHL-TV is on the air.
Stephanie Boyd has been at the scene all night and joins us now live. Stephanie?
Reporter Stephanie Boyd updates the story live from the roof of the building.
So far, we went to a press conference about 30 minutes ago. Officials are reporting 12 confirmed deaths at this time.
30 years later, she returned to the place where she stood that night to deliver the live report.
It was so cold that night. I remember that it was very hard to talk. I was doing my best to keep it together on air, but my lips were barely moving. It was so cold.
Around 50 additional rescue units had to be called in from surrounding areas to help put out one of the worst fires in Johnson City's history.
All these years later, standing on the same spot where she stood that very night, the emotions come flooding back.
Yeah, it was 30 years ago, and I'm still tearing up. Yes, I do remember that very vividly. I remember them carrying bodies out. It was tough. Somebody said to me later, you know, I think you probably went through some PTSD. I don't know if I did or not. That may be a little extreme, but it's impactful when you watch that. So yes, at first we were just all trying to kind of feel it out, and we knew it was a big story and what's going on here and all hands on deck. Then there became a point where, you know, you knew that this was one of those stories that was going to stick with you forever.
Back at the fire scene, Johnson City Manager John Campbell begins answering questions from reporters who aren't from the Tri-Cities. National news organizations start to hear what's happening in Johnson City, Tennessee.
So we set up a regular kind of 30-minute report. Here's what we know. Here's what the latest is, and just trying to handle those questions so the firemen and policemen didn't have to handle that.
Smoke poured through the 10-story retirement home last night at dinner.
This is a portion of the newscast that aired on CBS Network News Christmas Day.
This was the second fire here in recent weeks. The first was contained quickly, but this one somehow spread without warning.
It was bad. It was, you just can't imagine the feeling of losing somebody. 16 fatalities. You don't ever want to see anything like that. I mean, ever.
Yeah, they know it's over there, honey.
Why happen to not getting it?
I guess they couldn't do it. They can't get to every place at once.
I covered a lot of stories in over 20 years of a broadcast career. A lot of fatalities and some really tough stories to cover, but there was nothing like this night. You know, watching 16 people literally die before you and watching people being carried out of the building. It was a tough night.
Days later, federal investigators would put the horror of the night into words, writing about people on crutches, walkers, and canes, trying to navigate stairs from as high as the 10th floor. Others are too frightened, too old, or too confused, so they stayed in their apartments and waited. One couple was found dead sitting in their chairs, reading the Bible. At least 50 people were injured, including 15 firefighters. One of them, Danny Jones. He was one of the first firefighters on the scene.
I didn't know I was burnt for hours and hours. Had no idea about that. This is the actual helmet that I wore the night of the John Sevier Center. After the fire, it was, you know, I couldn't use it anymore. The heat, the shields, I've been around shields that have melted before. It's normally the first thing that melts on the helmet. And I'd done that, and I'd seen some of the people that had that happen. But myself and the other firefighters had the, you know, it's not supposed to be indented that way.
Another tragedy, 150 homes lost, people now with nowhere to go, and only the clothes on their back to take with them. As Christmas Eve comes to a close, the future of a stunned community was about to shift to a new emergency, getting help to the survivors who needed it.
In the midst of the sadness and the frustration was this sense of people are going to come together.
And the focus was about to shift from what happened to why and who, if anyone, was to blame. The days after the John Sevier Center fire were filled with funerals and public memorials and frustration. Frustration on two levels, really. First, over how something this horrible could have happened so quickly. And also, more immediately, frustration for families of those fire victims, some of the survivors themselves as well, who were being forced to wait to go back inside the building and salvage what they could. Ivan Atwood's family was able to save this, that General Electric clock that hung on his wall on the 7th floor. It still hangs in his son's home today. Smoke ruined everything in Juanita Ward's apartment, everything except this.
I do still have a Christmas ornament off her tree.
A prized possession with happy memories.
She was the rock of the family.
Teresa Greer says she and her family felt no anger after the fire.
I hated the fact that it happened that way, but I mean, it's just the wrong place at the wrong time.
But others were mad.
I had people come up to me and say, what are we going to do about this? What can we do about it?
Don Arnold was Johnson City State Senator at the time. He and fellow House member Bob Good formed a legislative study to look into why so many died.
Let's make an effort to try to find out, to make sure something like this don't happen again.
The committee met several times during the summer and fall of 1990. Its final hearing included pointed commentary from Nashville architect Connie Wallace, one of many professionals who helped the committee and referenced renovations made to the John Sevier Center in the 1970s.
These plumbing holes, they talk like went the entire height of the building, maybe 10
They
floors.
created a fire trap with the changes.
Shouldn't an inspector have seen that and done something about it? It looks to me like the inspector, right, in this particular case, were just looking the other way.
I think truly there's enough shared responsibility to go around, and I see it being among the architect, the engineer, the contractor, and the building officials, the inspectors. And the owner.
Good, who chaired the committee, expressed concerns over building inspections.
I think the John Sevier experience is one of the best examples that we can offer anywhere right now as a breakdown in the system. We had a bad structure. We didn't have adequate inspection. Obviously, what codes are on the books were not being adequately enforced.
Eventually, legislation was passed. Building officials would be required to receive state fire marshal certification. Any city enforcing its own codes now would be audited every 3 years by the state fire marshal.
We'll never know the truth, but I can't help but think that maybe it saves some lives.
While state lawmakers crafted a response, investigators were at work at the highest levels of the federal government. The United States Fire Administration, a division of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, issued this report. The goal to determine what happened and what should be learned. A state fire marshal determined smoking materials used by a tenant in room 102 sparked the fire that spread across the first and second floors of the building. Investigators said the tenant was a known chain smoker who'd accidentally set 2 fires at the John Sevier. But the federal investigation looked even deeper. The investigation found periodic fire inspections were conducted at the John Sevier Center. The last one happened almost a year before the fire. The report says sprinkler systems were being discussed by fire officials, the building's owner, and engineers. So was a plan to limit occupancy of anyone with mobility issues, particularly from living on the upper floors. Investigators said heat detectors would have provided an earlier alert, and properly installed sprinkler systems could have prevented the rapid spread of the fire on the first 2 floors.
I had talked to some people about high-rise buildings in the state of Tennessee and this type building that they needed sprinkler protection, and they need to push it through the legislature. And later on, I think this did have something to do with it, them changing the rules and making it mandatory for them to do that, to have sprinkler protection. It probably had an impact on that.
But Johnson City's Fire Chief Doug Buckles says even after the scrutiny of hindsight, he remains proud of the work done by his department that night.
I didn't see anything whatsoever that we could have done that could have been any better.
You did the best you could.
Yeah, the best you could with what we had.
But across the street from the scene of the fire, something had changed Christmas Eve.
Everything was ready for us to walk in and sing. and start the worship service, and it just never started that way. It was a different kind of service that night. I remember it as a night when there was a tragedy, but I also remember it as a night when this church really kind of was the church.
And at that same time, this church was known by the moniker, not that we sought to be known by this moniker, but in this community, this church was known as Money Memorial.
We didn't recognize our neighbors. It was very easy to drive into downtown. You came to church, you came to the few remaining stores that were still open, you got back in your car and you left, and you never looked across the street to see who was there.
And being honest, I would say that most of us in this church had on blinders and really did not see our neighbors across the street. But on that night, Christmas Eve 1989, the blinders were singed off and we saw our neighbors. And almost immediately we realized we need to connect with our neighbors now. And there were a group of people who came together and said, now that we see them, we need to get to know them. Let's do that by serving breakfast every Saturday. And that's when the Shepherd's Breakfast was born. And it has been going on every single Saturday since it started. Then there were others who said, you know, they're serving breakfast on Saturdays. We could serve lunch. And now 26 churches are coordinated by Good Samaritan Ministries to serve lunch. Now, instead of hearing Money Memorial, when you're out in the community and we're asked, as we Southerners ask, where are you from? And then the second question is, where do you go to church? And we say Muncie. People say, that's where I go to serve. And so the brand, our image has changed. And I am so grateful for that, although I'm so sorry that it was a tragedy that started that change.
The people at Muncie were not alone in their new awareness of the need in the heart of downtown Johnson City.
You can see how close this building is to that building. And I drove to work here every day, and I didn't know who lived in that building. I didn't know those folks. I knew very little about it. But, you know, in one instant that night, I learned about those people, and, you know, they had faces and personalities and families, and they were very vulnerable.
In the 30 years since the John Sevier Center fire, the ministry of caring that was born that terrible, cold December night here in downtown Johnson City has steadily grown. But now, 30 years later, that relationship and really the future of this historic building are at a crossroads. There's a new owner here, new plans for the John Sevier, and some new concerns over what life will look like for the 150 people who still call the John Sevier home. In September 2019, the Johnson City Development Authority purchased the John Sevier Center with the intent to restore it to its former splendor.
My thought is it will go back to retail on the first floor, and either high-end apartment condos or a combination of condos, apartments, and a boutique hotel. With 11 stories, there's a lot of opportunity. Our goal is to work with the developer, find a new location for the residents here that's clean and safe, and then we will work with the developer. The whole goal for us is the revitalization of this property.
But plans for people who live here to move out of downtown come with concern.
So we're in this place of wanting our neighbors who are directly across the street from us to have good housing, adequate housing, safe housing, housing where they have green space. And so we are eager for them to have that. In order to have that, they'll have to be moved out of downtown directly, which means they may not have access to services quite as readily. And so we're trying to walk alongside the residents to understand that the Johnson City Development Authority really does care about them.
A future of hope for a building built on hope about a century ago. If plans are realized, future Christmas Eves will bring elegant celebrations back to the John Sevier, like the ones that happened here when it first opened in the 1920s. But Christmas Eve will always remind us of what happened here December 24th, 1989, and the lives that were lost on that cold winter night.